right, up next, we have Randy Pargman with Delicious Pretzels and Devious Packets. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Angela.
How are
Hi,
you?
everybody at PancakesCon. This has been such a fun experience today, and we were looking forward to adding a little bit to it. So let me start sharing my screen. All right, I think you should be able to see that. Everybody see that all right?
Looks good.
All right, my name's Randy.
I'm Lindsay.
We're going to share with you one of our favorite recipes for making soft pretzels at home. And if we have some time at the end, we might tell a little bit a few stories about pretzels, but we're going to try and get through this live baking experience first and leave enough time at the end to talk about domain fronting, which is a lot of fun too. All right, so we're going to talk over these videos of this dough that we made yesterday. You start off with 1 cup of milk. We use almond milk because we have lots of people who are lactose intolerant, and it comes out really good. And you want the almond milk or the regular milk to be warm at about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason for the warmth is to activate the yeast, but if you make it too hot, then it can kill the yeast. So that's one of the reasons why you watch the yeast and make sure that it rises or proofs, right?
Yeah.
The next thing that you're going to do is add the yeast. And if you've got a package of yeast, you can just rip it open and put it right in. But if you have like a baking problem like us, and you have a lot of yeast in your refrigerator, you can use a teaspoon measure and do 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, which is the same as
Single packet. Yes.
Yep. Sorry about the dog. We'll get her quiet. She is wanting some more treats, which is her reward for sitting through PancakesCon. So next, we're going to put in some brown sugar. The brown sugar has a couple of different reasons in this recipe. One is to make the pretzels a little bit sweet. This is debatable whether you want a sweet pretzel or not, but this is something that we really enjoy. It also feeds the yeast. It gives the yeast something to consume, and the yeast does a better job of rising the dough, so it's soft. And then the last thing that it does is it helps the pretzels brown up really nicely in the oven. So that's why we use the brown sugar. Next, you're going to wait about 5 minutes and make sure that the yeast gets foamy. This is called proofing the yeast, and it's really useful so that you don't end up, if you've got bad yeast or if you've killed it or done something wrong, you don't want to go through all of the trouble of making pretzels and then have them come out like hard pretzels in the end, right? Yeah. So next, we're going to mix in some flour with the yeast, and we start off with 1 cup of flour and measure that carefully. And then put that into a big bowl and add the yeast and milk mixture into that. And then stir it together with a wooden spoon. Now, you can also do this in an electric stand mixer if you have one, but we purposely did it this way by hand so that you can see that even if you don't have the fancy equipment, you can still have a lot of fun and do baking at home. It just takes longer, and you have to be able to, or be willing to put in a little bit more elbow grease.
Yeah. And this isn't your full dough yet. You're just adding the flour to get a good start and get your liquids mixed in properly before you finalize your dough.
All right. So next, we're going to add in butter. And again, we used a vegan butter, a plant butter, because we wanted it to be lactose free, and it comes out just fine. But if you want to use regular butter, I'm sure that is just fine too. If you use regular butter and it's coming out of the refrigerator, you might want to let it come to room temperature first so that it'll melt. But the plant butter is soft enough already that it melts really easily. Remember, you started off with 110 degree milk, so this is already pretty warm, and the butter melts pretty well in there. So just keep stirring it until it's pretty well melted. One of the reasons for butter in any kind of bread is to make it really soft. This changes the consistency of it. And this is a consistency that we really like in our pretzels. So that's why we put the butter in. Next, you're going to add the rest of the flour. So it's about 1.5 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon salt. And I've read in a fancy bread baking book that you really shouldn't measure flour by volume. You should really measure it by weight. But that's really too much trouble. We never do it. And it seems to work out just fine. So I'd say just do it whatever way is the easiest way for you. And for us, that's just use the cup measure. So the reason that we're putting in the salt later is because we don't want to kill the yeast. If you put in too high a concentration of salt to yeast, it can kill the yeast early on, but as long as the yeast has been diluted with the flour, you've got a lot of volume in there, you can put salt in without any problem for the yeast.
Mm-hmm. After you've combined this second addition of flour, it's going to be really shaggy, sticky mess. And that's exactly where you want to be. So it looks like this, which is not pretzel consistency yet, but this is exactly where you want to be at this moment.
All right, so now we're going to show how to knead the dough. It takes about 5 minutes. We timed it yesterday, and we'll just show you most of that. There's me. I got in the video too. I think the worst part about this, or the part that might turn you off the most if you don't do this, is that it's sticky dough, and so it sticks to your hands. So you definitely want to use plenty of flour. Be generous with the flour. Mm-hmm. Lindsay actually taught me something with this yesterday. I usually just make a mess of my hands and have some flour kind of stacked up on the side of the countertop.
Yeah.
But the better way to do it.
You'll see that I'm kneading the dough with my left hand until I can get it past the really sticky point, so I can keep putting my right hand back into the flour container to add more. And you'll notice that after I've added a little bit, I dump the rest of it on the side so I don't have to reach back into the container repeatedly. And once it's there exactly where my hands, I can get both hands into the dough. I no longer have to worry about reaching in as often. And you'll notice that even after I've added the flour that's on the counter, it is still going to be a sticky dough. I'll show you my palms in the video in just a minute, and there's still a lot of dough stuck to me, which is okay. This is the kind of consistency that you're looking for, and it will start to come together after you've kneaded it that 5 minutes.
All right. Again, if you've got a stand mixer, this just becomes super easy. You don't have to really get your hands messy at all, and you just let it go. Yeah. Do we do it for 5 or like 3 minutes?
I probably only ran it for 3 minutes quite regularly. I leave the dough quite sticky in the stand mixer and then let it rise in the stand mixer. So this is actually adding more flour than I normally do. Yeah. But it's still, the consistency turns out the same.
Yeah, you can always add more flour later, but you can't take the flour out. Or at least not through any method that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And if you put too much flour in, the problem is that the dough gets heavy and thick, and it's going to end up dry and just not as risen, right? Yeah. It's going to be more of a dense kind of a packed finished product.
Yep.
And then if you look at the video here, the amount of stickiness here, this is exactly what you're looking for if you're kneading it by hand. It still comes cleanly off the counter or the cutting board or whatever you're kneading it on, but it sticks just a little bit. And then we're putting it into a bowl that is greased with plant butter or with whatever butter or you know, anything will work. You just don't want it to become a real sticky mess. And then the last thing is to cover it up. You could put a wet tea towel on it, or you could put some plastic wrap like we did, and then you let it sit. And the recipe says to let it sit for an hour in a warm house. It almost always takes 2 hours in our house. I don't know why. Maybe it's just cooler.
We're in Seattle and there's higher humidity and it's not ever very warm.
Yeah. So we're going to stop the video share and then just share our live video. Here we go. All right. So now's the live baking time. We're going to take the dough that we made before, and we're going to make 2 different kinds of pretzels. I really like the kind of pretzels that are sort of the traditional shape. And Lindsay does a pretzel knot that, quite honestly, it tastes better. But I kind of like making the shape because it's a lot of fun.
It doesn't taste better. There's just a lot more soft dough.
That's right. So if you like the crunchy outside of the pretzel more, make the traditional shape. If you like the center part that's really soft, make the pretzel knot. But we're going to show you both. The other thing we want to show you is a technique that we learned from watching at Auntie Anne's. Auntie Anne's, if you're not in the United States, I guess, is a chain restaurant that makes fresh pretzels. It always smells really good in malls and airports. It sucks me in every time. Like I have to buy a pretzel from Auntie Anne's. So we had been doing pretzels for quite a while, and we'd been rolling the dough out into this really long snake, and it just took a long time. And then we watched the aunties do it, and they just made like a log of the dough like this.
Well, it's still really soft.
Yep. And then they used a knife or what is that thing called?
This is a bench scraper.
Bench scraper, whatever. And you just cut off a long piece and it's already ready to go. And then you don't hardly have to roll it at all. You can just kind of like tap it like this. And look, I've got a perfect pretzel tube that is just about right without hardly doing any work at all. Okay, so
That's
here's
a giant pretzel.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be fun. I like making big pretzels. Okay, so here's the part that looks like it's really complicated, but it's not. Just take the two ends and then you
Cross them
twice. So then you've got something that looks like this, and then you just loop the top of it down over the bottom, and voila, I've got a pretzel. All right, so Lindsay, you want to show how to make the pretzel knot?
So usually I cut off a small round of dough on the end of them. When I'm making a batch that's the size, I usually get the batch cut in half, and then I can make usually 8 out of these. If I'm making larger rolls, if I want something big, then I'm going to only make 6. So I'll cut it in half and then cut 3 pieces. But this is usually about the size of a piece of dough that I work with. So I'm going to try to get it to relax, use the gluten, but I don't want to stretch it out as far as Randy did. Then what I'm going to do is take my dough and I'm going to tie it into a knot, a granny knot. Then I'm going to take part of it and I'm going to stretch it a little further and I'm going to go around again through the dough. Let's see if I can do this. Through the middle, and then I'm going to go on the back side of the dough and I'm going to press the two ends together and I'm going to put them behind the dough. So what you end up with looks like this. And as we set them on the counter and we're working in between, I'll make another one. They'll start to rise, and the dough itself was quite volume filling in the bowl. It was voluminous. But as you hit it on the counter and you're working with it, you're taking a lot of that extra air out of it. You don't need to allow a second rise on this particular dough. It will do a lot of rising in the oven itself.
All right. So the next part is where you get the outside crunchiness of the pretzel. And we're gonna get a couple of these going.
Did you get it hot?
Yeah, I did. I got hot water. Is
Awesome.
this enough water? That look good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the crunchiness actually also helps the inside to stay really moist because the outside sort of crusts and it doesn't lose as much moisture from the pretzel. So there's 2 ways to do this. There's the German way, which is probably the right way, and then there's the American way that we do it. So I'm going to show you both actually, and we're going to do an experiment and make 2 pretzels and you can see the difference when they come out of the oven. So the American way to do it is to put some baking soda. Is it baking soda?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I always get mixed up baking powder and baking soda. Baking soda in warm water, and you don't want the pretzel to touch the solid baking soda. So you kind of let it settle in the bottom and try not to get the pretzel on that. Otherwise, it tastes too much like the baking soda.
Yeah, you pick up the residue from the bottom of the container, and it'll actually even leave like a white mark on the pretzel or the knot from the residue.
All right, so I'm going to get my pan ready because it's going to be a little bit messy. Can I move that over just a little bit?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take the pretzel. I'm trying to make sure everything's here where you can see it on the video. I'm going to take the pretzel and I pick it up by the 2 legs here so that it doesn't completely fall apart. And then just dip it into the baking soda water. And so I messed some up because I didn't get some on here, but that's all right. And then it's going to be a little bit misshapen, which is fine because it still tastes good, but I like to sort of shape it up a little bit too. All right, so that's the American way to do it. The German way to do it, which I'm sure is more proper, and does get a more of a crunch, but it really grossed me out the first time that I heard about it, is to use lye. So this is food grade lye, and I got it from a German delicatessen, specifically for making pretzels. And I'm just going to brush this on here because I'm not going to make enough lye to dip a whole pretzel into. And so when these come out of the oven, at the end of this presentation, you should see the difference. The bigger one is the one dipped in the baking soda, And the smaller one is the one with lye brushed on. Here, can I move this for you?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we'll get that. And then of course, the last and most important step is to sprinkle coarse salt on the top of the pretzel, because the most important part of the pretzel is that saltiness. Well, I don't know, maybe it's the crunch, but I like the salt a lot. The nice thing about this is when you're making your pretzels at home, you get to choose how much salt you really want to put on there. I think some of the pretzels that I've gotten before have just been too salty. As much as I like salt, I don't want it like drinking the ocean. But we are going to use just some regular.
I have it.
Oh, thank you. We're just going to use some regular coarse Morton salt that you get, kosher salt.
Yep.
If you live someplace that's really cold, you might know this from sprinkling it on your front porch that it doesn't ice. I'll get some of that too.
We just use a pinch bowl because it's a little easier than having a large container for your extras. And go for it.
All right, thank you very much. I'm gonna shake some of this flour off. I made a mess by putting the pan too close to the flour, but that'll work out.
The other thing is we use parchment paper. Parchment paper helps save you a lot. You'll see when the pretzels come out of the oven, that crustiness that you get from the baking soda actually kind of caramelizes around the edges, and it'll bake into your pan and leave you with these hard to scrub out issues later. So it's a lot faster if you just use the parchment paper for cleanup purposes. And we'll show you.
Yeah, I've scrubbed a lot of pans after making pretzels, and I do not recommend it. The other thing I want to mention is if all of this seems way too intimidating, like, wow, that was a lot of steps and, you know, like mixing these things and taking all this time, I want to give you an easy option too. So this is a box of pre-made pretzel mix. The only thing you need to add to this is water and some oil. So we didn't even put oil, but we put butter in ours, which kind of serves the same purpose as far as keeping it soft. This also comes with the lye and the salt, and everything else is pre-measured. So it is super easy. In my opinion, this is pretty good. But if I was going to make pretzels for my family for dinner, I think I would do it from scratch, even though it's more trouble, just because we like that recipe. But that's personal preference.
Yep.
Also, I say if you want to get really good pretzels and you get the opportunity to go to Germany, or you know somebody who's lived there and really knows how to make them the German way, that's a fantastic pretzel. And I don't want to take any thunder away from German real Bavarian pretzels. Yeah, those are really good. The other thing we'll show you when they come out of the oven is mustards, because there's a lot of fun to be had dipping pretzels in mustard. So I'm going to switch topics now, and I'll take my apron off and go into my cyber defender mode. I'm going to share about domain fronting. So hopefully you can see my screen again. There we go. So it is actually a law that every cybersecurity presentation has to have memes. And I realized late last night that I didn't have any at all. So I just added a whole bunch on the title slide. I hope you will forgive me for last minute memeing. All right, so let's talk about domain fronting. First of all, let me provide an example, and shout out to Brett Fitzpatrick for putting this out on Twitter a couple of months ago now, I guess. I noticed this come across and used this as part of my threat hunting, looking for this Cobalt Strike beacon. And I thought it was really nice of Brett to share this information, and having parsed the beacon configuration file, he was able to share also the back-end domain and all of the, or it was an IP address, I think, in the end that it went to. But also kudos to Fastly for taking this thing down pretty fast. The content delivery networks have been doing a better and better job of trying to detect some of this stuff, and especially when it's known that people are using it for evil purposes, and try to cut that off. So kudos to anybody who is doing that. But first of all, you might be wondering, what is domain fronting? If you are not familiar with it and you're like, wow, that's just kind of a term, it doesn't mean anything to me, I want to explain it with an analogy. So imagine that you are a chaperone or a teacher on a middle school field trip, and Billy, the student who is most devious in the class, says to you, hey teacher, I really need to use the restroom. Where is the closest restroom? And you look around and you see, oh, it's in this mall over here. And you say, sorry about the dog. You say, Billy, you can go into the mall and use the restroom. Just make sure you come right back. Well, what do you think is going to happen in this scenario with the arcade in the same space as the mall? Of course, Billy is going to go into the arcade. He's going to pretend like he's going to the bathroom because he goes toward the mall, but he's actually going to play games until his quarters run out or until you go and fetch him. That's what domain fronting is. It's telling the authority or showing on the outside that you want to go to a certain place on the internet by making a DNS request, and then actually going to a different place. Well, how does that work, you might wonder? Like, if you know anything about DNS, you know that you make a request for some domain name and it returns an IP address. There's more to it than that. And then you connect to the IP address. The difference really is what's called a content delivery network. So here is the requisite very busy diagram. Hopefully this will all make sense. The evil application, or I won't say evil, how about devious application, is on the left side of the screen. And let's just call that Billy so that you keep the analogy in mind. Billy makes a DNS request that says, I need to go to .net.microsoft.com. And the reason Billy says that is just like the request to go to the bathroom, going to anything.microsoft.com seems safe. And I want to pause here and say, I am not picking on Microsoft. Microsoft is doing a really good job, and lots of other CDNs support domain fronting as well. I'm not going to name all of them out, but it's not like a Microsoft problem that we're talking about here. Okay, so he says, I need to go to .net.microsoft.com. .net.microsoft.com, I've said that too many times now, haven't I? Is hosted on a content delivery network that is also run by Microsoft. Content delivery networks allow people all around the world, millions and millions of people, to be making lots of requests for web pages and for those to be delivered by a server that is closest to them geographically so that it is fast. And so it takes the load off of a single server. You don't want people all over the world having to go multiple hops through routers to get to your website if they could get a cached copy from a local server. So for that reason, there are lots and lots of domain names that all resolve to the same localized IP addresses. So I'm going to show you in a minute the IP address that .net.microsoft.com resolves to. There are like 9,000 plus other domain names that also resolve to those. So that's where the confusion can come in. So the DNS server responds with, here's the IP address that you need to go to. And then the application, Billy, says, okay, I'll go to that IP address and make a connection. But when it's made the connection, it's going to send to the server that it actually wants to go to a different domain. Because Billy knows that that other domain is hosted and can be accessed through that same IP address, because of the CDN, that's why it works. So there's actually some detail here that's important to understand. There's two different other places where that domain name that Billy actually wants to go to can be specified. And we're going to assume that they're using TLS, encrypted connections, or HTTPS, because that's the most common, and that's mostly what attackers are going to want to use too. So if you are using HTTPS or TLS, you've got two different places you can put the actual domain to say where you want to go. One is in the TLS SNI header. SNI stands for the server name indicator, and it's unencrypted. It comes in the part of the network communication where you are negotiating the encryption protocol and saying, hey, I want to exchange these keys, and by the way, here's where I want to go to. It's important that it's there because the CDN needs to know which server certificate to serve up. So it's necessary that the SNI goes across the wire unencrypted before you start that encryption process. So that's one place. The other place is inside of the encrypted packets, and that's the HTTP host header. That's what's telling the server that you've actually connected to, this is the host that I want you to serve up. If you've ever hosted websites, you can have lots of different websites at the exact same server at this exact same IP address. And the only way to tell which one is which and which content to serve up is by that HTTP host header that says, which of these websites do I want to go to? So as a defender, as a threat hunter, the important thing for you to know is if the different domain is put into the SNI header, you can absolutely detect that even if you are not decrypting TLS traffic on your network, because it has to go across the wire unencrypted. You need to be monitoring your network traffic to be able to do this at all. But this is a really good place for you to catch it. Now, the threat actor or whoever's doing the domain fronting doesn't need to put it in there. They could actually put the same misleading domain name, the fronted domain, in the SNI header. And then they could put the domain they actually want to go to in the HTTP header. If they do that, the only way that you as a defender are going to be able to spot it is if you decrypt the TLS traffic. You need to have like a man in the middle that's decrypting those packets so that you can tell if there is a difference between the SNI and the HTTP host header. Now, the other thing is if the attacker does that, the CDN provider like Microsoft or Fastly or whatever else, they can actually tell that there's some domain fronting going on because they have to see both of those. They see the SNI header and then they see the HTTP host header. Oh, those pretzels look good.
Careful, it's hot.
Thank you. So if the attacker decides to do that, they're putting their account at risk that the CDN is going to take them down. Okay, hopefully that's enough explanation about what it is and how it works. If you want to try this out on your own corporate network, if you want to see if you can detect this and you want to see like what do your controls look like, you can actually do that. And I've written a program to help you. So first you need to find a frontable domain. I'm going to use Microsoft, not because I'm picking on Microsoft, but actually because they've got a really nice, easy to use interface for creating your own CDN service. And it doesn't cost a whole lot. And I actually really like it as a CDN. So you go to your Azure portal, create a new CDN endpoint, and you give it whatever name you want. I'm calling it Devious C2 server here, which is of course not what you'd want. You want to pick a more subtle name than that. And then you figure out, once you've created it, what is the IP address or the range of IP addresses, you probably get several, that it resolves to. Then you use passive DNS. And I want to do a shout out here to Mac from Open Source Context, who gave me a free API key so I could show you this. There were actually 9,317 results for domains that resolved to these IP addresses when I set this up. So I just picked .net.microsoft.com because it looked really friendly. All right, so now you want to generate the traffic. You can actually do this with a C2 framework, like create an implant, but that can be a little bit difficult to test and you might set off all of your antivirus and everything else. So if you want a nice, friendly, completely benign program that all it does is generate network traffic, it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't, allow the attacker to, or anybody to control your computer. It doesn't, come with any risks. You can use this program that I wrote or write your own. And I open sourced it. So I hope people will contribute to it. I put the address to it on GitHub here, and I will pop that into the Slack chat when our presentation is done. Here are all the different command line arguments. You can choose if you want to put the fronting in the SNI or not, if you want to use HTTPS or not, if you want it to look like a beacon, how often do you want it to go, like what's the polling interval, how long to pause in between connections. You can put some jitter into it in case you want to, put some variability, like the polling interval changes by 15% every time or something like that. So I hope you will go check that out and use it. It's written in Go, so you can compile for Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever. And I've used it on all of those. The next thing I want to show you is how would we detect this? So on that same GitHub, if you go there, I've copied my most recent KQL, Kusto query language, threat hunting query to find these differences. And like I mentioned before, you need to be capturing network traffic because that's the only place you're really going to see this. I use Suricata because it is open source and free, but there's lots of other things you could use. You could use Zeek or pretty much anything else that is inspecting network traffic. In Suricata, there's these nice headers or nice fields that have already been created called the TLS SNI and the HTTP host. And so you can key off of that. And it looks like we've still got enough time. So I'm going to dive into a live threat hunt, and we'll show you what it looks like in Azure Sentinel. And then when we're getting close to time, we'll go back to pretzels and show you some mustard. So I want to ask if there are any questions, if you want to put it in the chat, and if the moderator doesn't mind popping in with those questions, I will be happy to answer those questions while I'm doing the threat hunting. So give me just a moment to switch screens that I'm sharing. Here we go. All right, and I hope you will pardon me for looking away from the camera because I need to look at the screen for doing this. So this is Microsoft Sentinel, and we're looking at my lab environment where we do a lot of testing. I've tried to comment this query so that it makes sense, but it'll also really make sense if we just kind of take it bit by bit. So I'm just going to take off the last part of that query and we'll just run the first part of it. The first part is looking for DNS answers. So when somebody requests some DNS question, resolve this host name, I want to get back any of the records of type A or quadruple A, that's the IP address for IPv4 and IPv6 respectively. And you can see back, you can see that I'm getting a whole lot of results here, right? So it's just showing me the date and time, what was the DNS question, what type did we get back, and then what was the answer, which should be an IP address. So this is, in other words, just passive DNS in my own environment. And you can do stuff like this to gather passive DNS in your own network environment, which is a really handy thing to do. The next thing that we're going to do is join that together with all of our TLS connections. I've got another query that's for unencrypted HTTP. In that case, it's never going to be encrypted. You can always see everything and you can just key off of the host header. There's not going to be an SNI field for unencrypted HTTP. But for this demo, let's just stick with TLS HTTPS because it is the most common. So what I'm going to do now is join that together with the TLS record. So this is every time there's been a TLS connection, we're going to look at the TLS SNI header, and we're going to look for any records where the DNS name, the question, does not match what was in the TLS SNI header. You might think this is all we need to do, but it turns out that that's pretty busy too. And the other thing that I'm going to do, whoops, what happened here? Okay, Sentinel, I think, was just hiccuping for a moment. The other thing that we're doing is we're looking at only those records where the DNS question and the TLS connection happened less than 10 seconds apart. The reason for this is because with CDNs, IP addresses change all the time, and we're only interested in those things that are happening pretty much like right together. So if somebody's trying to do domain fronting, they're going to do a DNS lookup, and then they're going to make the TLS connection pretty much immediately, less than a second after. We're just giving it 10 seconds just for good measure. Also, because this is all coming from the same source, Suricata, I know that it's time synchronized, so I don't need to worry about if one clock on one computer is 10 seconds off from the other one. Okay, so now we've got a little bit more information here, and you can see we've still got a lot of records. There's 174 pages with 50 records in each one, but we've added on to it. Here is what was in the TLS SNI field compared to what was in the DNS request. And for each one of these, it should be different. And it kind of gives you an idea when you start doing this, just how common CDNs are. And like, this is just a lab. This isn't even like a big enterprise network. You see a whole lot of this traffic all the time. It's really quite fascinating, and it's wonderful engineering that the CDN creators have put together. But still, we've got way too much stuff to look for. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take away everything that had a CNAME DNS lookup response. And I've created this custom function, which I've also shared on GitHub, which will give you all of the CNAME responses for DNS lookups. You might be wondering, what does CNAME mean if you're not familiar with DNS? But this is a really useful concept to learn, especially if you're doing any kind of network threat hunting. CNAME stands for canonical name. And the easiest way to think about this is when you look up some easy to remember domain name, like binarydefense.com, and behind the scenes, it is more useful for that to go to this really long, kind of difficult to remember name like cdn-02-uswest-binarydefense.com, whatever. I'm making this up. But it basically makes DNS a little bit easier to use by being able to answer the CNAME question differently depending on where in the world you are, so that it can be served from someplace that is closer to you, and also relieves human beings of having to remember these really long domain names. You don't want to have to remember, hey, when I'm in the western part of the United States, I should use this really long domain name, and if I'm in the eastern half, I should do this other thing, except if I'm in Tennessee and it's something special. So you don't want to have to remember that. CNAME just takes care of that. It's like record keeping behind the scenes. So here is a really keen observation about the way that domain fronting works. It almost never uses these CNAMEs as part of the lookup where the answer to the CNAME is the actual domain that they're trying to, the backend domain that they're trying to hide from you, right? Because they don't want you to see that. However, the CNAME lookup is really common in these other circumstances. So we put that CNAME on, and basically we're just taking off anything where that question and answer for CNAME came up in our results. That cuts it down a lot. And then the last thing that we're going to do is join it together with sysmon records so that we can see from the endpoint perspective, what was the process that was responsible for this connection. And that tells us a lot about whether this is suspicious or not. So remember, I had hundreds of pages and thousands of responses before. This takes a little bit longer because we're putting together lots of different tables. But in the end, now we've just got one page, and these are all of our results right here. So you can see there, this is still not all devious, but it is a reasonable amount to look through for this environment. And you could narrow it down some more by looking for particular things that are common in your environment and taking those out of the results or whatever. But we're going to go through these really quick. I'm just going to hide the IP addresses because I don't think that's useful to anybody right now. It's useful if you're going to do some more investigation though. And then I'm going to expand this a little bit more so that you can see the process path. And I'm going to give the results some more of my screen real estate. So the way to read this is left to right. This is the DNS name that somebody asked for. This is what they actually connected to as far as the TLS SNI field. And then here are the programs that we're doing that. So we can see Teams comes up in this a whole lot. And then let me scroll down since we're getting close on time. I want to show you some of these results. Okay, so this is actually an example of the fronting domain that I was using. And I pulled this right out of a tutorial on how to set up a domain front, natickcdn.azureedge.net, which is the same as natick.research.microsoft.com. And then the TLS SNI is vsupdateserver.azureedge.net, which is the CDN endpoint that I created myself in the lab. And now I'll just time it to see how long it takes Microsoft to take that down. And that's fine if they do. This is for experimentation only. The next thing that I want you to see is what was the process that was responsible for that. So any of you watching this who are threat hunters, you probably just got goosebumps on the back of your neck because anytime you see svchost.exe showing up someplace that it's not supposed to be, it's probably a bad day. So this is definitely our example of domain fronting. I think we're going to wrap it up there because we're almost done and we want to take any questions that we have. So any questions that have come up in the chat?
Hi, Randy. Yes, there have been quite a few for the two of you. Let me just pull it back up. This is wonderful, by the way.
Thank you.
First was for the pretzels. What kind of flour, if you have a recommendation?
We use King Arthur flour. I think that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Have we used anything else?
No.
No, that's pretty much it. King Arthur flour.
Yeah.
Any recommended places to get pretzels around Seattle or possibly Leavenworth?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sure Leavenworth, you can get them everywhere. I think they grow on the trees in Leavenworth. And if you're not from the Seattle area, Leavenworth is like a
Bavarian town.
Yeah, Bavarian town. It's super cool. We love going there. In Seattle area, go to Bakery Nouveau. and you have to order the pretzels ahead of time the day before, and then they'll make Bavarian pretzels for you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or if you are in the South Seattle area and you would like one of these pretzels, hit me up and I will go meet you somewhere with a pretzel.
I'm gonna call you in a minute.
All right.
Um, I think somebody asked about the dog. Where's the dog? What's the dog's name? What kind of dog is it?
Her name is Prim. She's a rescue dog. She's about 50 pounds. She's somewhere.
We love the dog. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any
She came from Tijuana and
Okay.
she now lives in Seattle. And so she's always cold and she wears a coat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And now she's scared. She doesn't want to come on the
Yeah.
camera.
Just had opinions. I get it. Best places to learn KQL.
Ooh, that's really good. So actually, I would say subscribe to the Microsoft Security, it's not webcast, I guess. I don't remember what they call it. But they put on really regular webcasts and they have recordings available and they'll do a live share with like experts and some really cool people who know a lot about KQL. And they recently did one where they did some KQL exploration through Jupyter Notebooks, which I thought was a really interesting way to go about it, but very effective. The other thing that I would say is I will share on Twitter. There's a good reference book for KQL, which you kind of learn by example. And then I would say that the best way to do it is just dive in and start playing around with it. It's pretty simple. There's a Azure lab that you can just kind of roll out in the free tier of Azure. You get like $200 credit for 30 days and you can use it all within that. Just make sure to cancel it after 30 days so you don't pay the bill. And it's got like sample data in there and all kinds of stuff.
Next question was, if you're in Seattle, why is it so bright in there?
Because we've got all these lights. I wish I could show you like how many lamps we put up so that we could light properly. Yeah. But rest assured, it's totally cloudy and rainy outside.
Yeah.
Do any of the CDN providers mitigate what you were doing on IPv6 by using a unique IP address per domain?
Ooh, I don't know. You know what? I didn't experiment with that. I would love to know the answer to that too.
All right,
I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I've seen CDNs like taking a harder approach to this. I also want to mention, like, domain fronting isn't a bad thing necessarily. It also helps people in countries that are oppressive to get around restrictions and pretend like they're going to one site and actually go to another so that they can get their news. So it has a proper place. It's just often misused.
Okay. And then are CDNs generally starting to block domain fronting from working?
Yeah, they're doing a lot more. And I did see a public statement from Microsoft that said that they are going to take measures to prevent people abusing their CDN for domain fronting. So as a defender, I would love that day. I would like all the CDNs to just figure out a way to not allow people to do that. But the reason I was showing the differences between like putting the fronted domain in the SNI field or not is because depending on how you do it, you're either, as the attacker, you're either giving more visibility or possibility of visibility to the defenders locally or to the CDN. If you put the fronted domain in the SNI and you have the backend domain in the host header, you're telling the CDN, I'm doing domain fronting. And if they're mining their data, they can stop you from doing that. If you don't, if you put the backend domain in the SNI field and you just do the DNS request as the fronted domain, now you're putting more of the onus on the local defenders to detect that, and you're not giving the CDN as much to work with.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Awesome, thank you. I know you said something about mustard. We're at time.
Okay, so I put it on Twitter too, but I want
Okay.
to show you Handelmeyer. This is fantastic if you like sweet mustard. This is not spicy at all.
Okay.
There's also some really good Engelhofer spicy mustard if you like that. So yeah, we don't need to demonstrate mustard, but you can buy this online, get it shipped to you. It's pretty good. The one thing I do want to show you is this is the pretzel with the lye. This is the pretzel with the baking soda. They pretty much came out the same. It's not a whole lot of difference. And what you really want is to have a nice soft interior. So thank you so much for your attention and hope to share some pretzels with some people.
Thank you both. Beautiful pretzels, great info.